Welcome to another edition of Tillis Mistakes with me, National Master Bryan Tillis. And this time we're going to be taking it back to 2005. Again, this was in my formative years in chess, and this is going to be at the I Am Rachel's Appreciation Open. And I am 1608 at the time, playing against player rated 1800. And the focus of the lesson is going to be, well, we're going to hit a few topics, but the main goal of the lesson is for you to question, why are you playing the openings that you're currently playing? Is it because it's easy? Is it because your coach told you to? Is it because the name of it sounds cool? There's a multitude of reasons why someone can settle or play an opening. And I was a player without a coach, so I tried a lot of different openings over a short time period, and I kept trying everything that had a name that I could find using chessgames.com back in the day. And I eventually realized that I wanted to be different from other players that were in my home state, so I started playing systems that nobody else was playing that were reputable. And that worked out quite well for me, and my ascent to expert and the top 10 list in Alabama was pretty quick. But games like this were huge in regards to personal reflection, because this game was one of the games that helped me realize that I needed to understand theory at a deeper level if I was going to beat better players. I remember in my first few tournaments, the very first rating I had was 1375 from US Chess, and I grew up playing on Yahoo Chess. And this was before chess.com and ICC were big. And you start at 1200 there, and I remember being able to get my rating to 15, 1600, and that was huge. You got that next color up. And then couldn't get past that. 1800s were so strong. They were demigods. And I had put players on a pedestal. And you can't do that. Psychologically, if you put your opponent on a higher tier than yourself, you're giving an advantage to your opponent before a move is ever played on the board. So I have to insist, the psychology of competition when facing high-rated players, take it to them. We will see in future videos in this series that I am happy. I am a duck in water when I have a lower-rated player not attack me. They just want a nice, calm, solid game. I'm never under any pressure, and I'm at no risk of losing. That's when I'm going to play my best chess. Now, if a young player that's 400 or 500 points low rated than me is taking it to me from move one and attacking me with reckless abandon, I have a lot of work to do there, and if I have one slip, I can lose on the spot. So keep these types of things in mind in regards to your style and your goals in chess. It is self-reflection that you need to be doing. So without more talking, let's go ahead and jump in. And this time I was white. I played 1e4, and what's good for you as a player? Well, my opponent goes e5, knight f3, knight c6, and already this is a key moment because there are a multitude of reasonable lines, and as a rule, I typically don't teach my students e5. If they're playing black against e4, I'll teach them anything else because I believe there are so many tactical tricks with f7 and losing the games quickly that, you're just teaching to play the French defense, for instance. Not going to be that many tactics that are going to be game losers for you out of the gate for a pure beginner. And they're able to practice, get better at chess, and not get demoralized getting 4-move checkmate every time they sit down in their first handful of games. So what do you play here and why? Well, I played knight c3, and the 4 knights, though it's reputable, it is not exactly the most ambitious approach here. Rarely seen in top-level encounters that aren't rapid or blitz events. Now, a line that I really like that I've currently been working on is bishop b5, and you delay the exchange a single move. And I really like this idea because the most optimal version of the exchange has black playing this f6 move quite quickly and strengthening the pawn structure. So I like to set practical problems for my opponent, and after knight f6, on takes, he's put his knight on f6, which in turn you need to know to move the knight to d7 and play f6. And typically if black doesn't do that, he gets a worse game. And oftentimes, white is just castling kingside and, just getting a position. But I found these lines quite interesting that if white goes queenside, you can actually get a dynamic attacking position, and you can look to maul your opponent if they're not playing accurately. So it's not a very difficult line. It works with multiple Spanish variations, and in an upcoming E4 text you might see it pop out from me. Of course, bishop c4 is fine, the Scotch is fine, but for me it's either Italian or the Spanish if you're an E4 player. Anything else outside of that, if it doesn't hold up in correspondence chess, it's not going to hold up from a well-prepared opponent. That's why E5 is so reputable. There's a lot of mediocre responses for white. And sorry, Scotch Gambit players, but if the opening is basically refuted in correspondence chess and not played, or King's Gambit, I don't recommend it. Evans Gambit, on the other hand, that is a great opening. So, got some ideas there for the E4 players. So without further ado, knight c3 and d4. And, this is the tamest version of the 4 knights that you can choose. And only players like Magnus can make this look good, and he does it from the black side. So here's some other ideas if you're insisting on playing the 4 knights. Bishop b5 is the complicated variation. There's a lot of theory there, and I feel that black's doing just fine. I know there's some interesting lines with like knight d4 here, for instance, but bishop d6, normal moves will do. Even bishop b4, copycat. And then we've got g3, and I was always a big fan of fianchettos. I still am. And you're able to just get a playable position, and bishop e3, if they take, you got some play in the center, and we've got this dynamic game with opposite side castling. It's roughly equal, but maybe some players' cup of tea. My point is there are many ways to imbalance the game. This particular variation, if I'm playing for a draw, which I don't think exists, this is what you do with white. It's non-ambitious to just go through a theoretical line that trades a bunch of pieces, and there's not enough material left on the board to win. If you're trying to beat your opponent, you need to create complications that you are more comfortable with than they are in order to press them until they make a mistake and crack. That's the goal. This line isn't going to do it with my opponent, who is stronger than I am and clearly has more experience. Bishop b4 pins the knight. I take, and bishop d3. Another opportunity, to play something different, potentially play aggressively, and now we're getting to this main line position. I play the most aggressive move, bishop g5, and after queen f3 I pin, and this is what I knew to be the theory in the position, and I was done. This was all I knew about the position once I got here, and I was on my own. And I want you to see exactly how I played as soon as I was on my own, right after we do this short interlude. This is how I believe black should play, and I'm going to show you a very quick game by the boss, Magnus Carlsen, because I distinctly remember this game. And bishop d6, and Carlsen is playing against a 2655 FIDE rated opponent, a guy who is, if he's not in the top 100 list in the world, he's knocking on the door. And he's played this extremely solid line with white, and Carlsen just creates practical problems. Rook b8 hits the b pawn. Okay, a5. My isolated a pawn's not doing anything, so let's use him. Tickle, tickle on the b. You're going to go back or you're going to trade. And once we get this endgame, black's pawn structure is crippled, yes, but he's got the b pair. That's an imbalance. That is all the boss needs. Knight e2, c5, and he just slowly improves his position. Knight looks good there. You force the trade, but my remaining bishop is still really strong. And notice, even though black has the doubled f-pawns, they can't really be bothered. And these pawns on the queen side are still pressing forward and are quite menacing. And rook d1 gets hit by c4. Now a4. And we get something to work with here. Protected passers. And the a-pawn's just not fast enough as Magnus slowly improves. And the b is too good. So this type of solid game is a good example of the higher rated player can grind out the low rated player in solid positions. It's much better to play dynamic chess and go after them. One of the tips of the day. So when my opponent plays bishop e7, I am on my own. And the first move I play is not aggressive, doesn't have an idea of, say, attacking. b3 is a common move in these structures. You get the knight out of the way and you play for c4, and you bother the pawn structure a bit. My first move, h3. So I'm like worried about bishop g4. Okay? Bishop h4 makes sense. Now, for instance, following along with Carlsen, this rook b8 idea is nice, and then rook b4. So if you like this position for black, I feel like black already has dynamic equality here with room to press. You got to play something like bishop g3 here for white. It already just feels passive. My opponent played bishop e6, a natural enough move. And now knight e2. I just have the idea of relocating this knight to a better pasture. And after knight d7, if I was looking to attempt to win, probably trading off an aggressive piece for a passive piece, is that something that should be considered? This bishop trading, not my first choice if I'm trying to win. Bishop g3 needs to be considered. But I trade, and I help black finish his development. His rooks are now connected, his queen's active. So now I continue with my plan of moving my knight after just trading without trying to keep tension. And in the game, my opponent played knight e5 to force things, but I think queen d6 is superior. And for instance, we get this kind of line where I really don't see a clear plan for white here. And black is by no means worse, where he has this nice pawn mass. I would prefer black for the long term. So knight e5 is also too accommodating, and it may be that my opponent was having the, well, he's playing well, it's a solid position, I'm playing black, I'll just trade down and make a draw. So maybe it's an unambitious game from both players. And here, I think my rationale was I need to take with the pawn because he'll move his bishop if I take with a queen, and I didn't know at the time whether or not my knight would be able to compete with the bishop in the open position here. So I took with the pawn, and on queen d6 I took, and then I was shocked by his next move, because I really do feel that you should be getting the pawn mass in the center moving forward. He goes rook e8, and then we get this kind of mass trade down, and here shows my lack of understanding of endgames. The counterplay would potentially come from the c and d pawns for black. So you need to stop this counterplay. I go b3, and I'm like, okay, I'll just pass, and your queen has free access if you just trade off all the rooks. Much better and more logical is b4. It restrains the c pawn and the a pawn, and I can look to play a4 in the future and maybe press a little myself. b4 and d4 could really lock things down. Just really, there's no excuse to miss moves like that. So b3, he's got the gun going, Alekine's gun. So not much of a choice here. I'm like, okay, well, let's just go into this king and pawn endgame. Attack this pawn, and my opponent thinks for a bit, and I'm pretty sure he offered a draw somewhere in here, and I don't know why I didn't take it, or I was like, let's play a few moves because I just wanted to see what would happen. And here is a good measure of players, because it's pretty hard to screw up a king and pawn in game like this, but players under 2000s do it constantly, and let's see how we mess this up. So d4 is the first move that I look at now, because it fixes the 2-for-1 special. I play b4 though, but d4 is just, both these guys are kind of stuck, and at worst my king can come up and then go back and forth as he just moves pawns all day. It's one of those scenarios that you have to envision where passed pawns are going to be created in king and pawn endgames, and that's going to be the passed pawn. And if I'm sitting in front of it, my passed pawn will come over here. So while he's busy getting that one, I could get the center. So I don't even think black is going to be recommended to try to create the passer by playing c5 after d4, and we're both just going to kind of shuffle back and forth towards the end of this game. But, of course, I go with something different, and I go with b4 here. King d6, d4, king c7, king d2, and that's all I have in the notes. But if we turn on our friendly neighborhood engine here, it's saying equal to, and maybe the position is just completely dead even with d4 or b4 or anything else. But looking at this game from start to finish, it is a very, very uninspiring effort. If I was coaching one of my students and they played a game like this, I would ask, what's the point in playing chess? If essentially you're playing an uninspired opening with white and you just trade down and you don't create imbalances, it's no point in playing the game if you're not trying to win. So major takeaways here: your opening selection. Why are you playing what you're playing? 2, when playing against higher rated opponents, when you have white especially, why not take it to them? And just from a rating point perspective, if normally it's the equation works out to be something of For every point different that you have between your opponent and the rating system, for every 50 points difference rather that you have, you earn 1 point for a draw. So he's 200 points higher, so I would only gain 4 points. But I think when you're 1600, if I won that game, it would be something around 16 points. And I can tell you it gets much harder. At my current rating, around 2300-ish, if I have a draw with a 2400, basically I gain 2 points. And a 2400 USCF is close to the top 100 players in the country in US chess ratings. So the higher up you go, the more you realize and you have to develop a results orientation and be willing to fight for wins at whatever the cost. So keep that in mind in your development, as it's definitely a lesson I've learned from playing games like this. And occasionally you just have these uninspired efforts, but if you've got good opening prep, it will rarely happen. That'll do it for today. Till next time.